Hey guys, it's been a while. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be taking you through the repasting of the Asus Proart Studiobook H7604 laptop, which comes from factory with liquid metal on the CPU and normal thermal paste on the GPU and VRMs. Apologies in advance for any stuttering in the audio, as this is being recorded in one take. So this laptop is actually quite powerful and comes with a claimed 160 watt TDP total thermal capacity for both the CPU and the GPU. However, after some time, obviously, you will notice some degrading in performance, especially with heavy CPU workloads or even within gaming. And part of how you can actually diagnose issues with this is you can run some of the synthetic tests like Cinebench, which will load up your CPU exclusively, and then you can just monitor how uh, your total package power behaves while it's running the benchmark. For this, you can use Cinebench 2024 because it's sort of a very intense version of Cinebench that really taxes your CPU, and it will be able to give you accurate results on the temperature as well as the total power output because it runs for quite a long time. Yeah, so here in this video, you can see the initial power target was hitting at around 160, 158 watts. However, after some time, the CPU starts throttling back heavily. How you can actually notice this is you'll see the power dropping between 140 watts, going all the way back down to 17 watts, and so on and so forth. So that means that there's an issue likely with the CPU's pasting. And then here we'll run Pharmac, which is also going to heavily tax the GPU as well. Now for the GPU in specific, what we have is not only the CPU, the GPU core temperature, but we also have the GPU hotspot temperature. And here you can see the GPU hotspot easily hits 100 degrees Celsius, which is never a good thing because this overall increases the GPU's total temperature of the core as well as all the other components. And over time, this can be damaging to both the GPU as well as all the associated components like the VRMs and other hardware that is used to run the GPU. Yeah. Here we have a game that I'll just also use like sort of like a real world test where we are just checking the overall sort of temperature and just general stability of the game and of the temperatures and the power outputs. And after some time with this game in particular, this is actually a quite old game. It's, I think, 2020, 2019 game. And what you'll see with this game is that the CPU isn't heavily taxed with this title. However, after maybe like 5-10 minutes, the GPU has actually hit its thermal throttling target, which is around 87 to 88 degrees Celsius, which means that now it starts throttling back on its own clock speeds and other critical factors that will in turn affect the performance. Yeah, so for repasting, I decided to do it myself. I mean, I'm already out of warranty and I might as well take the chance. So here, what we do is the first thing you flip the laptop over. You make sure you have all the tools that you need. Some of the most critical ones will be something like a hex screwdriver. If you can get a kit that's either maybe from iFixit or something similar, that has the precision tools, I think that would be the best option for actually getting this kind of work done. For the paste, I decided to go with conductor knot for the liquid metal because it's one of the highest performing liquid metal pastes that you'll find around, and it's relatively easy to find, and it also has a good price to performance ratio. And then for the normal what do you call it? For the normal paste, I decided to go with Cryonaut as well as a little bit of UTGX. It's a Chinese brand, but allegedly also has good reviews online. Yeah, so what you can see me doing on the top left corner is I actually, every time I'm opening the laptop, I make sure I lay down some masking tape, which will allow me to place all the screws based on where I've removed them from the laptop. Because most laptops, as you might notice, actually come with different lengths of screws for different sections of the laptop. So you always want to make sure that you're returning the correct length of screw to the correct position. And then you pry the laptop open. This laptop actually is relatively easy to pry open because it just has a few clips and it has a plastic section on the front that you can press in and then use a plastic tool to open it up. Make sure you don't use any metal tools because they will damage the plastic that's on the front. Yeah. Then another critical thing to do is always disconnect your battery before touching any electrical components because this can easily short out on an open motherboard like this one. Yeah. Then I just quickly cleaned out the fans just to make sure that I'm not dealing with any dirt or grime within the system. Uh, of course, I'll still find more once I open the heatsink up, but it's a good place to start. Yeah, then from there you disconnect all the fan cables, the screen cables. For this one, you don't have to disconnect the Wi-Fi cable because it doesn't run through the screen. However, it did have two connectors. I'm not sure what exactly each of those were for, but I think one of them must have been the antenna cable. Yeah, so then from there you also remove the screws for the heatsink. Again, make sure you map out exactly where you remove the screws. It always helps when you're putting the laptop back together that you'll not miss out on putting any of the screws back in place once you're reassembling. Yeah, so you just open it up. So this needs to be done gently and make sure if there's anything snagging onto the heatsink, this will be a good time to just make sure it clears properly and just to make sure you don't damage any of the cables because again, these cables are very sensitive and very brittle. So this is just showing what you would likely expect. Now for this job, I had already done the repasting previously, but I had noticed I was not getting the correct temperature, so I decided to redo it again. Because normally this laptop doesn't come with the thermal pads that you can see in blue as shown. It comes fully with the thermal paste applied on all the sections. So the only one that's still consistent is uh, um, the liquid metal that comes exclusively on the CPU. So just for a sort of like a close-up look of the laptop itself um, and the motherboard. So what you can see, you see the VRMs need to be covered in heatsink in uh, or rather connected to the heatsink via the thermal pads or thermal paste. I decided to modify the laptop a bit and went with a 0.5 millimeter thick thermal pad because I generally feel like they perform better over long periods of time. Yeah, so it's always better to have a thermal pad where you don't need to use thermal paste because also the thermal paste is quite messy. Yeah, so for the surfaces, for the liquid metal, I used around 1,000 grit sandpaper just to make sure the level is as flat as possible. Again, thermal paste is not meant to fill a large gap between your CPU and your heatsink. It's only just meant to fill up a small section that basically is sort of like filling up very minute gaps between the heatsink and the CPU. So with the sanding, you actually get the level down to as close as possible, such that the thermal compound between the two devices is minimal, which is actually what you're looking for. Yeah, so here, this is the conductor nut by Thermal Grizzly that I'm using for the CPU. Again, it's highly recommended by most people, and you really can't go wrong with the Thermal Grizzly conductor nut. Yeah, so for the thermal paste, I actually decided to go with this Chinese brand again. You could Google it. You can Google them on your end yourself. But from my end, what I saw is they had decent reviews and they actually seem to perform quite well. Yeah, so for the placing of the liquid metal, one of the key things to note is you have to make sure that you've already been able to run it through the syringe. Uh, why it's very important to do this is you can easily end up with like a blockage where you're applying too much pressure when you're trying to get the thermal paste out, and what will happen is it'll end up spreading all over your computer's motherboard, and highly likely in that situation, you might short out something. Even if you think you've cleaned it out completely, it's very risky to spray any amount of liquid metal onto your motherboard. So always make sure you've removed at least one drop somewhere outside the motherboard prior to trying to place it onto the CPU die. Yeah, so here I'm just put a quick small drop onto the CPU die, and now what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to spread it out as evenly as possible. Again, you want the layer to be as thin as possible, and the minimum amount of liquid metal that you will be able to run, that's what you want to actually put on your CPU. Again, the reason for this is you're limiting risk as well, because you don't want the extra liquid metal flowing over and then getting onto other parts of your motherboard. Though for this laptop in particular, it comes with some sort of spongy barrier between the CPU die and the rest of the motherboard, so it's actually safer to run it on liquid metal. Yeah, again, you do the same thing on the heatsink side. This is also very important because what this will do is once you've been able to get some level of liquid metal onto the heatsink, these two will actually merge together and then form like a perfect bond between the heatsink and the CPU die. So as you can see there, it's quite a bit of a hassle to get it to finally start spreading. I don't know whether it's something to do with the copper and the liquid metal not quite getting along together, but eventually it starts spreading onto the heatsink, and once you get a very nice thin layer onto it, I think you can move on to the next steps. So here I'm just showing quickly the pasting of the thermal paste onto the GPU dies, the GPU memory, as well as the VRMs getting their coating of the thermal pads. And what this will do again, as I said, is just give you a nice consistent connection between the heatsink as well as those dies and VRMs, because you want to be able to dissipate as much heat as possible from the GPU and the CPU. Yeah. Again, the hotspots are also something you would want to avoid, because previously, as you saw with the GPU benchmark, once you have a hotspot, the hotspot can very easily end up limiting the rest of the performance of the hardware. So anytime you have a hotspot, that's always a bad thing. Yeah. So now for placement back of the heatsink, you just want to make sure everything is aligned prior to placing it down. You don't want to move it in the XY direction at all once you've basically positioned it. The reason being is you'll end up smudging um, the the compound material, and you can easily end up compromising the contact surface that it will have with the dies and the VRMs. Yeah, so once it's placed on, you just make sure you just give it a very light press. But again, you don't really have to do this because they're spring compressed screws that is what I'm closing on right now. And these are actually spring compressed. So watch how what happens is once you tighten them, the spring will slowly push the heatsink back onto the dies and then make a perfect contact between the two surfaces. Yeah, then from here you just do the same thing. You put back the screws for the fans. Just make sure you've reconnected the fans themselves. Those need to be plugged in. You plug in the screen, you plug in the antenna cable. Make sure everything is put back exactly as you removed it. Again, you want to avoid having any issues where there's some hardware that's not going to be detected by the system once you um, line it up. Now for here, they actually run into quite a big issue where I shorted out the clip that holds the battery plug in place. Again, I was very lucky that I didn't burn out the motherboard, but that's something that you need to be very careful with. I don't know why they went with this particular method for holding the battery connector in place, because it's very dangerous to have that loose metal laying around. So actually what I did is I ended up having to do a little bit of a thermal pad just to make sure I don't have any metal on metal contact between the motherboard and that clip that holds the battery in place. Yeah, so just be careful about that. And if your laptop comes with that, again, just make sure you do it well. Finally, that's the LAN cable that sort of runs over the heatsink and makes its way to the back where the LAN port is, and then you just now return the casing over the laptop and then replace all the screws exactly as they came out. Again, this is purely for the fact that they come in different lengths, so you don't want to be misplacing the screws and end up potentially damaging the system. Yeah, so once we finish the repasting, we're able to rerun the benchmarks once again. So for here now, what you can actually see is with the benchmark running, we're able to now get the peak system power hasn't really changed that much. However, what we've really gained is much more consistency with the system, because now the system is able to maintain 100 plus watts on the CPU alone throughout the entire run, and we get a significantly higher score. Previously, we were getting around 1,000 points on Cinebench 2024, and right now, with the repaste, we're getting easily in the region of around 1,300 points. Again, this can always be improved by an undervolt, but for some reason, Asus decided to disable undervolting for this system. So we go now over to Pharmac, and here, one of the key things to monitor is, remember how the last time we had a major issue with overheating of the GPU hotspot. So with here now, what you can see is it's actually maintaining very good temperatures. It's not going well past 90 degrees Celsius. And what this means basically is that we have a much more stable system, and we're not running into thermal throttling as soon as we were running into it previously with our previous hardware pasting. And what this in turn means is we'll get much higher scores. And then finally, for the real world gaming performance, what we're actually monitoring is, again, the GPU and the CPU temperatures, as well as the GPU and CPU clock speeds. And what you'll actually observe with this is after 10-15 minutes, we're still maintaining a generally stable system, and we don't really have to go into undervolting or as much of underclocking of the GPU, or even the system itself underclocking the GPU too much. And the reason for this again is because we have much more uh, thermal headroom, because now we are actually getting very good connections with our system. So thank you for watching. In case of any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below.